The rain had been falling for 3 hours before the sky broke. Not with thunder, not with lightning, with something heavier, a sound like a mountain deciding it was done being a mountain. It rolled across the valley, shook the window glass, and knocked Reed Calloway's tin mug clean off the kitchen shelf. He picked it up, looked at the ceiling, listened. Then he put on his boots. Reed was not a man who moved fast unless something needed moving fast. He was 51 years old, built like someone who had spent decades carrying heavy things, and he had a face that suggested he had seen most of what the world could throw and had simply kept walking after. He had farmed this land on the colony world of Arda's Edge for 11 years. Before that, he had spent 8 years as a field medic in the Colonial Auxiliary Forces. Before that, he did not talk about. He stepped onto the porch with a lantern. Something enormous was lying in his front yard. It had crushed the left half of his fence. It had flattened a good portion of the grass in a wide circle. It was breathing. He could see that immediately, the slow rise and fall of something vast and dark and scaled, like a hill that had chosen to exhale. The rain ran off its sides in rivers. One wing was stretched out at a wrong angle, the membrane torn in 2 places. Along its left flank, 3 long wounds glowed faintly at the edges. Not fire, not exactly, but the angry pink-white of burns that had gone deep. Reed stood on the porch for a moment. Then he went back inside and got his medical bag. It was an old bag, patched at one corner, smelling of antiseptic and years. He grabbed the large wound gel, the colonial-grade kind that came in containers the size of paint tins, used for burns on heavy labor units and large livestock. He grabbed the lamp. He grabbed a length of clean cloth that had once been a good shirt. He went back out into the rain. He approached slowly, not because he was afraid, though a reasonable man would have been, but because a hurt thing deserved to be approached slowly. He had learned that in the field. You did not rush at something wounded. You let it hear you coming. You let it decide. The dragon did not move as he came close. Her eyes, one visible, the size of a dinner plate, pale silver with a slit pupil, were open but unfocused. She was somewhere between conscious and not. The burns on her flank were bad. Whatever had made them was not natural fire. Plasma, most likely. He had seen plasma burns on soldiers. They looked the same. Reed crouched beside the nearest wound and opened the gel tin. He worked quietly the way he always worked. No commentary, no panic. He spread the gel along the largest burn with the flat of his hand, using the cloth to hold it in place. The dragon made a low sound, not a growl exactly, more like a structure settling under enormous pressure. He kept working. When he had done what he could on the flank, he looked at the wing. He could not fix the wing. Not tonight, not with what he had. He could clean the tears, keep infection out. That was all. He did that. It took an hour. By the time he finished, the rain had slowed to a mist. Reed stood up, his back aching, his shirt soaked through. He looked at the dragon. She was still breathing. The unfocused eye had closed. He dragged the cattle trough over. It took 4 trips with buckets to fill it and positioned it near her head. Close enough that if she woke and was thirsty, she could drink without moving far. Then he sat down on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, and looked at her in the gray pre-dawn light. She was silver black. Not dark gray, not dark blue, actually silver, underneath the black like metal under old paint. Even wounded, even soaked with rain, there was a quality to her that was hard to name, like she had been made with more care than the things around her. Reed did not have communication equipment strong enough to reach the Colonial Authority tonight. The storm had killed his relay. Even if he had, he was not certain he would have used it. He had seen what the Authority did with things it did not understand. He had watched, once, a medic call in a report on a non-human casualty and wait while the casualty bled out during the classification process. He had not been that medic, but he had stood there. He had not forgotten. She could leave when she was ready. That was his decision, made quietly, sitting on wet porch steps in the gray light of a ruined morning. Near dawn, she moved. Not much, just one claw, the front right, extending slowly over the edge of the porch, pressing against the wooden boards, testing something. The way a person touches a floor in the dark to make sure the floor is still there. Reed watched. She pressed her claw to the boards once, gently. Then she was still again. He picked up his tin mug from the step where he had set it. It was empty and cold. He went inside to make something hot, left the door open so the light fell out across the yard, and did not once think about whether he had made the right choice. It did not feel like a choice. It felt like the only thing to do. 2 days passed before she spoke. In that time, Reed learned a few things about her by watching. She did not eat, at least, not anything he could provide. She drank from the trough he had filled, slowly and without embarrassment, like someone deeply thirsty who had decided dignity could wait. She slept in long, heavy stretches that made the ground vibrate faintly. When she was awake, she was still. Not the stillness of rest, the stillness of something thinking. He changed the wound gel twice a day. The burns were responding. Slowly, but they were responding. The wing tears were clean, no infection. He had done that right, at least. He did not ask her questions. This seemed to confuse her. He noticed it on the second morning, her eye tracking him as he worked on her flank, a small tension in her jaw that was not pain, like she was waiting for something that was not coming. On the second evening, Darrow came. Darrow Pell was Reed's nearest neighbor, half a kilometer down the road, a man whose primary personality trait was that he worried about everything with great enthusiasm. He was thin, nervous, and genuinely kind, and he arrived with a covered dish of something hot because he had seen Reed's relay go dark in the storm and wanted to check in. He got to the gate, he saw what was in the yard, he stopped walking. Reed stepped off the porch. "She's hurt," he said. "She's not a threat." Darrow's mouth opened. No sound came out. "She won't hurt you," Reed said. "Come in if you want, stay out there if you'd rather." Darrow stayed at the gate for a full minute. Then, with the expression of a man who knew he was going to regret this, he came in. He set the dish on the porch steps without getting any closer than 4 meters to the dragon. His eyes never left her. "What is she?" he said very quietly. "Hurt," Reed said. Darrow looked at him. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have tonight." The dragon's eye moved. It found Darrow. Darrow made a small sound and went extremely still. The eye stayed on him for a moment, then moved away. Darrow let out a breath that sounded like it had been held since childhood. He started coming back after that. Every day, a little closer, a little less pale. He brought food for Reed, extra wound gel from his own supply kit, and a piece of heavy canvas that turned out to be very useful as a secondary cover for the torn wing when the temperature dropped at night. He never quite relaxed around her, but he stopped leaving immediately. On the morning of the third day, a coalition patrol ship crossed the valley. It was a standard Mark 9 survey vessel. Reed knew the model, had traveled in 3 of them during his service years. It came in low, running a slow grid pattern, the kind used for biological or thermal scanning. Reed watched it from the porch without moving. He noted the hull markings. Northern Reach Coalition, 3rd Patrol Division, a long way from their usual corridor. He glanced at the dragon. Her eye was open. She was watching the ship too. Neither of them said anything. The ship completed its grid and moved on over the ridge. That evening she spoke for the first time. It was not dramatic. She did not raise her head. She did not look at him directly. She simply said, in a low voice that resonated somewhere in the chest rather than the ears, "You are not afraid of me." It was not quite a question. Reed was sitting on the porch steps working a crack out of a fence post with a chisel. He did not stop working. "You were hurt," he said. "You came here. That seemed like the important part." A pause, long enough that he thought she was done. "You have not contacted your authorities." "No." "Why?" He set the chisel down and looked at the fence post. Because I know what happens when you contact authorities about something they don't have a category for. He picked the chisel back up. Mostly, the thing they don't have a category for ends up worse off. Another long pause. The sun was going down behind the tree line, turning the sky the particular orange that Reed had decided, over 11 years, was the best thing about this planet. "You know what I am," she said. He considered that. "I know you came down out of that storm with plasma burns and a torn wing. I know you've been watching every sky vehicle that's passed since you got here. I know you drink about 30 liters at a time when you drink." He looked over at her. "And I know you're not well yet." The silver eye regarded him from across the yard. She did not speak again that night. But in the morning, when Reed came out with the wound gel and the clean cloth, her head had shifted, just slightly, so that when he crouched beside her flank to work, she could see him without turning, without effort. It was a small thing. Reed noticed it and did not say so. He just did his work, the same as every day, while somewhere above them the patrol routes tightened, and the coalition ships drew their invisible lines across the sky. On the 5th day, a second dragon arrived. This one came in fast and low, skimming the tree line at the back of the property, and she was small meaning the size of a large draft horse rather than a hill. She was younger, her scales a deep copper brown, and she landed in the field behind the barn with enough force to scatter the chickens for a full 3 minutes. Reed came around the side of the barn and found her already moving toward the yard, head low, eyes scanning. When she saw the silver-black shape resting near the porch, she stopped. Something in her posture cracked open, all that tight, frantic energy collapsing into relief, so sudden it looked like a physical thing. Then she saw Reed. The relief disappeared. The head came up. The eyes fixed on him with an expression that required no translation across species lines. "What did you do to her, and why are you still breathing?" Reed kept walking toward her at the same pace he had been walking, not slow enough to seem cautious, not fast enough to seem aggressive, just walking. "She's healing," he said. "Burns on the left flank, torn wing membrane. I've been treating both. The burns are closing. The wing needs more time." The young dragon stared at him. From across the yard came a low sound. Not words, but something that worked like words, something with weight and direction. The young one's head turned sharply toward the silver-black shape. Her posture changed completely. She lowered herself, not in the way of a creature lying down, but in the way of someone who has just understood where they are and who they are standing in front of. Reed watched that and filed it away without comment. The young dragon, he would learn later that her name was Lys, spent the next hour near the silver-black shape, speaking in Draconic, a language Reed did not understand but could read in terms of rhythm and tone. Most of it sounded like questions. Some of it sounded like arguments. The answers came slowly, briefly, and each one seemed to settle Lys down another degree. At some point, Lys looked at Reed again. The suspicion had not left entirely, but it had changed shape. Less threat assessment, more puzzlement. On the second hour of Lys's visit, a coalition ground vehicle came up the farm road. It was a standard two-man patrol unit, the kind that followed up aerial scans on foot when something in the scan data did not resolve cleanly. Reed saw it coming from the porch. He looked at the barn. The silver-black shape had already moved, not fully inside, but shifted so the barn wall was between her and the road. Lys had pressed herself flat into the shadow beside the equipment shed. For something her size, she vanished remarkably well. Reed walked down to the gate. The officer who got out was young, professional, carrying a data pad and the mild suspicion of someone doing a job they found boring. He introduced himself as a Northern Reach Patrol officer running anomaly follow-ups from yesterday's aerial sweep. He asked if Reed had noticed anything unusual in the area. Large animals, strange lights, unexplained thermal signatures. Reed leaned against the gate post and thought about the silver-black shape lying 10 meters behind his barn, burning faintly at the wound edges. Had a main processor unit on the irrigation rig seize up 2 days ago, he said. Thing threw heat for about 6 hours before I got it shut down. Probably lit up your thermal scan pretty good. The officer looked at his pad, looked at Reed. Any animal activity, large scale. Boar got into the south fence last week. Big one, tore up about 4 meters of posts. The officer made a note. His partner, still in the vehicle, was looking at something on his own screen. Reed did not look at the barn. He looked at the officer, steady and unhurried, with the expression of a man who had nothing to hide because nothing worth hiding was happening here. The officer thanked him. They left. Reed turned back toward the yard. Liz was standing in the open now, fully visible, staring at him. Her eyes were wide. Not afraid, something past afraid, something more like recalibration. You lied, she said. Her galactic comment was clean and slightly formal, like something learned from official records rather than conversation. You lied to a coalition officer, for her. I lied for a patient, Reed said. Come out of the shadow. You're not hiding anything at that angle anyway. Liz stepped forward. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he could not fully read. Then she looked toward the barn. From behind the barn wall, something shifted. The silver-black shape moved around into the open yard slowly and faced them both. She looked at Liz. Then she looked at Reed. When she spoke loudly. Not for the valley, not for the sky, loudly enough for him to hear. Liz, she said, this is Reed Calloway. He is under my protection. Liz went very still. Then she lowered her head again, deeper than before. Reed stood in the afternoon sun and let the weight of that settle around him, because he could feel it had weight, even if he did not yet fully understand the shape of it. He went inside. He put the kettle on. Whatever was happening, he thought it probably warranted something hot. She told him on the 7th day. Not dramatically. Reed had dragged a wooden chair out into the yard. He had been doing the wound checks out here for 3 days now, since she had made clear she preferred the open air, and he was cleaning the last of the burned scarring when she began to speak. Her name was Sorvin. That was the first thing she said. She let that sit for a moment, the way you let something land before explaining what it means. Then she told him the rest. She was the Sky Sovereign, ruler of the Draconic Dominion, a term that covered roughly 3 star systems, several dozen habited worlds, and a population of her kind that Reed could not quite picture in number. She did not say this with pride. She said it the way a person states a job title when the job has become complicated. The ambush had been planned over 2 years. Counselor Yeth of the Volkai, an insectoid species, members of the Galactic Coalition, theoretically allies to both humans and dragons, had built a case in coalition back channels that the Draconic Dominion was a security threat, that the dragons were too independent, too powerful, too unwilling to accept coalition oversight. Yeth's argument, Reed gathered, was the kind that sounded like reasonable concern, while actually being fear wearing the clothing of reason. The ambush had hit her during a solo transit. Her escort had been misdirected. 3 ships, coalition adjacent but privately contracted, had opened fire before she could react. She had taken the damage and run. She had looked for something dark and far from everything. She had found a farmer. Reed listened to all of this without speaking. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 3 ships and they didn't finish it. Either they didn't plan for you to survive the first pass, or they didn't want it to look like an execution. Sorvin looked at him. You understood it tactically. I understood it the same way you understand anything you've seen before wearing different clothes. He set down the cloth. Yeth didn't want a war. He wanted an incident. You dying in disputed space, cause unclear, that's leverage, not war. He could point at anyone. She was quiet. Which means, Reed continued, he still needs you dead or captured before you make it back to your people. and the coalition admiral running patrols over this valley either doesn't know Yeth's full play or doesn't want to. Liz, sitting near the barn, had gone very still. She had that expression Reed had started recognizing, the one where she was recalculating something about humans. Darrow arrived that afternoon with a box of old equipment. He had, without anyone asking him to, dug out a colonial-era passive receiver array from his barn, the kind of hardware that could monitor coalition communication channels without broadcasting anything detectable. He set it up on Reed's kitchen table, got it running, and spent the rest of the evening with a handwritten grid paper that he slowly filled with patrol timing data. "I used to do logistics," he explained to Liz, who was watching him through the window with enormous eyes. "For a mining operation, 14 years, you'd be surprised how similar the patterns are." Liz stared at him for a while. "You are both very strange," she said finally. "We're practical," Darrow said. "Different thing." By evening they had a rough picture. The coalition grid over the region had tightened since the aerial survey. The patrol intervals had shortened. Admiral Grain, the commander Reed had identified from the hull markings, was running a systematic sweep, not a random one. He was looking for something specific. Whether he knew exactly what, Reed could not tell. He sat on the porch with Sorvin as the light faded. She had been watching him all day in that way she had, not the predator watching prey, not suspicion exactly, but the attention of something trying to solve a problem it did not have the right category for. "Why did you do it?" she said. He had been expecting the question. He did not have a clean answer, so he gave her the real one. "Last deployment, end of my service year, we had a casualty, non-human, injured in crossfire, not a combatant. My unit's senior medic wouldn't touch her, said he didn't know enough about her biology, said it wasn't his problem." He looked at his hands. "She died. She might have died anyway, I don't know, but she died while he stood there being afraid of getting it wrong." He looked out at the field. "I'm not him. I decided that a long time ago." Sorvin said nothing for a long time. The patrol data clicked softly through Darrow's receiver. Liz had curled up partway in the barn, one eye still visible catching the light. "Grain is moving ground units," Darrow called from inside. "Looks like a sweep of the valley floor. Tomorrow morning, based on the interval pattern." Reed nodded once. He looked at Sorvin. She was looking at him. "I'll go talk to him," Reed said. The yard went quiet in a very specific way. The way it goes quiet when multiple large and small creatures all decide to respond to the same sentence at exactly the same moment. "You will not," Sorvin said. "You can't fly yet," Reed said, and he might listen to a retired colonial auxiliary veteran with a clean record faster than he'll listen to a situation he doesn't understand. He stood up. "I'm not going to fight him. I'm going to go have a conversation." Darrow appeared in the doorway. He looked like a man who wanted very badly to say something and had correctly calculated that it would not help. Reed went inside to find his old service identification card. He was going to need it in the morning. He walked down the farm road at dawn with his hands in plain view. No weapon, no communicator. His old auxiliary forces identification card in his shirt pocket, worn at the edges, with a photo that looked like a younger and significantly more tired version of him. He had put on the cleanest shirt he owned, which was not particularly clean, and he had told everyone back at the farm the same thing 3 times over. "Do not move, do not react, wait." Sorvin had looked at him with an expression that he suspected was the dragon equivalent of genuine disbelief. Liz had said flatly, "If you die, I will be very angry about it." Darrow had shaken his hand for slightly too long. The Coalition Mobile Command Post was set up at the valley's northern edge, 2 kilometers from the farm. Reed had seen it on Darrow's receiver data. It had a fixed thermal signature, which meant it had been there long enough to settle in. That was useful. A post that had settled in was staffed by people who had slid into routine. Routine made people more willing to process unusual things through normal channels. He walked to the outer perimeter and told the sentry he was a former Colonial Auxiliary Forces medic with a service record and a request for a direct word with Admiral Grain regarding the current sweep operation. The sentry looked at him, looked at his identification card, made a call. Reed waited, hands still visible, watching the way the morning light hit the ridge. 10 minutes later, he was inside. Admiral Grain was a large man running toward 60, with the kind of career face that had seen a long sequence of difficult decisions and had not yet fully resolved how it felt about all of them. He sat across a field table from Reed and studied the identification card as though it might tell him something the man across from him was not. "Calloway," he said, 11 years in the Arda's Edge Colony Register, 8 years Auxiliary Forces before that, field medic. Why are you here?" "Because I think you're running an operation you have incomplete information on," Reed said. "And I think the gap in your information is going to cause you a significant problem." Grain's expression did not change. "Go on." "The target of this sweep," Reed said. "You were told what exactly? A dangerous biological, an escaped asset, a security risk." A pause, not confirmation, but not denial. "You weren't told you were cleaning up after a private contracted hit on the sky sovereign of the Draconic Dominion," Reed said. "Because if you had been told that, you're too experienced to be parked in a valley running grid sweeps. You'd have walked away or escalated to people above your pay grade, and either way Yeth's operation falls apart." Grain was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that meant active processing, not dismissal. Reed had sat across from enough officers in enough field tents to know the difference. "You're telling me," Grain said slowly, "that Counselor Yeth used my patrol division as cleanup for an assassination." "I'm telling you that the wounded creature in this valley is the head of state of a dominion spanning 3 star systems. I'm telling you she was ambushed by private contractors working from information only accessible through coalition back channels. And I'm telling you that if she dies here, inside your operational perimeter, your name is on that. Not Yeth's. Yours." Grain looked at him for a long time. "You're a farmer," he said. "I'm a farmer who used to be a medic," Reed said. "I treated her wounds. She's alive. She can't fly yet. And Yeth's people are going to figure that out soon if they haven't already, and when they do they'll send something that isn't a patrol vessel." He leaned forward slightly. "You have a choice, Admiral. You can keep running your sweep and find her for Yeth, or you can point your sweep at Yeth's contractors and give her time to recover. One of those options ends with a head of state dead in your operational perimeter. The other ends with you being the officer who prevented a galactic incident." He sat back. "I know which one I'd rather have in my record." Grain looked at the table, at the identification card, at the wall. Reed did not push. He had said the thing. The man either had the capacity to hear it or he did not, and no extra words were going to change that. Finally, Grain picked up the communication unit on his field table. He turned it over once in his hand. "I'm going to need to verify some things," he said. "I know," Reed said. "I can find my own way out." He stood, picked up his identification card, and walked out of the command post the same way he had walked in, unhurried, hands visible, watching the ridge. He was 200 meters down the road when his communicator crackled. Darrow's voice tight and quick. "Reed, there are ships coming in from the south, not Grain's markings, 3 of them, low and fast." Reed stopped walking. Then he started running. Behind him, in the command post, he heard Grain's voice rising sharp and clear, already on the communication line, already saying things that did not sound like a man running a routine sweep anymore. The farm was 2 kilometers away. Reed ran. The first ship crossed the tree line before Reed reached the gate. It was not a patrol vessel. It was a gunship, compact, private marked, the kind of hull that meant someone had spent significant money on something they did not want traced back to them. The second was right behind it, coming in from the east. The third was still a dark shape over the southern ridge, slower, holding position like it was blocking something rather than attacking. Reed came through the gate at a dead run and found chaos in the yard. Darrow was behind the equipment shed with the old receiver unit clutched to his chest and the expression of a man who had accepted that he was going to die here and was extremely annoyed about it. Liz was in the air, barely, wing beats tight and furious, buying altitude she did not quite have the angle to use yet, drawing the attention of the first ship. And Sorvin. Sorvin was standing. Not lying down, not resting. Standing in the center of the yard, the wound on her flank still visible, her torn wing partially raised. She had positioned herself between the farmhouse and the incoming ships with the absolute calm of something that had been in worse positions and was not impressed. The first gunship opened fire. She took it, stepped into it, actually, shifted her weight so the blast hit the already damaged flank rather than the wing. Reed saw her absorb the impact and felt the concussive wave from 20 meters away. She did not move backward. She breathed out. Not fire, something older than fire, a compressed roar of pressure and heat that bent the gunship sideways in the air hard enough to crack its stabilizer housing. It dropped 40 meters before it corrected, and by then Liz had hit it from above, claws finding the engine housing with the focused precision of someone who had been trained exactly for this. The second ship swung wide, looking for a new angle. Reed grabbed Darrow's arm. "The shed, get down and stay down." "I'm already getting down," Darrow said, with great dignity, already getting down. Reed did not get down. He moved along the fence line to where his neighbor had, months ago, left a piece of survey equipment, a ground pulse emitter used for soil mapping, stored here because the cable reached this far and not one step further. It was not a weapon. It produced a tight electromagnetic burst at ground level, designed to measure soil density. Reed pointed it at the second gunship's landing struts as it came down in the far field and turned it on. The burst was not enough to damage the ship. It was enough to completely blind its landing sensors for about 4 seconds and cause every proximity alarm on the hull to fire simultaneously. The ship overcorrected on its descent, came down crooked, and dug its left landing strut into the field at an angle that twisted the leg housing and left it sitting at a 15-degree tilt it could not correct from. It wasn't destroyed, it was stuck. The third ship, still holding over the southern ridge, began to move. Then it stopped. Then it began moving backward. Into the southern sky, coming over the ridge in tight formation, were 5 coalition vessels. Not patrol vessels, response class, the kind that answered to admirals rather than patrol captains. They came over the ridge without slowing and placed themselves between the third gunship and the farm with the deliberate geometry of people who had received a direct order and intended to follow it precisely. Grain had made his call. The third ship held its position for about 30 seconds. Then it turned and ran. The first gunship, still dealing with Liz, attempted to disengage. Liz let it go not because she could not continue, but because Sorvin made a sound, low and directive, and Liz peeled off and climbed instead. The gunship fled south and was immediately pursued by 2 of Grain's response vessels. The second ship, still stuck in the field, powered down. The yard went quiet. Reed stood by the fence with a soil survey tool in his hands and let the quiet settle. His shirt was damp with sweat. His left knee was going to hurt tomorrow. The south fence was going to need complete replacement. Sorvin crossed the yard toward him slowly, each step deliberate, the damaged wing trailing slightly but folded now. She stopped in front of him, close enough that her breath moved his hair. She looked at him for a long time. "By draconic law," she said, "a debt of life cannot be paid in gold. It cannot be paid in words. It can only be paid by standing." Reed looked up at her. "I didn't do any of this to be owed." "I know," she said. "That is exactly why the debt is real." Darrow came out from behind the shed. He took one look at Sorvin standing in the yard, whole and breathing and enormous, and sat down in the dirt with the receiver still in his arms and cried, quietly and without apparent embarrassment. Liz landed in the field and folded herself down with the exhaustion of something that had run completely empty. She was asleep in under a minute. In the following days, the channels were full. Counselor Yeth was taken into coalition custody by Grain's people, along with enough communication records to make his trial straightforward. The Sky Sovereign had survived. The Draconic Dominion was not going to war. There were statements, formal and otherwise, from more authorities than Reed could be bothered to count. One statement came directly from Sorvin, short, formal, broadcast across 3 star systems. The Dominion had no quarrel with the Coalition. She had been given shelter and care during injury by a human of Arda's Edge colony. That human was now formally under draconic protection. Any harm directed at him would be treated as a direct challenge to the Dominion. Reed read it once, then he set it down and went to fix the south fence. That evening Sorvin was on the porch again. Same place she had been the first night. The wing was resting. The burns had nearly closed. She did not speak and Reed did not push. He brought out 2 cups from inside, an old habit, company or not. Set one on the step. She could not hold it, of course, but he put it where the steam drifted toward her face. She closed her eyes. He sat down on the step, looked at the sky for a while, and decided the fence could wait one more day. Some things were worth sitting still for.